Anyway, before the visuals come up, my background is architecture. How many people in the room are actually architects? There's a few. Okay, well done you. I should say I'm a recovering architect, except that I've failed at that. I'm actually no longer in architecture. I was quite happy to get out, but only because I'd spent 7 years consulting to architects, and so I felt like I needed something new to chew my teeth on. One of the things, here we go, just about there. Yeah, good, we're getting close. One of the things I wanted to say about architecture was that when I went through architecture school, there's a particular way that you get taught. You know, you learn things in your experience. You're not born with these attitudes or abilities or prejudices and so forth. The way you view the world is largely how you're taught and the experiences that you go through. So that's been reflected both in how I started to look at buildings when I first entered the workplace. I'm just going to go to the first slide here. And there's been a couple of other people talk about different perspectives over the last day or two. Let's see. Nearly there. Okay. I think that's fitting. Good. So I can make a start now. By nature, I'm an analytical person, so I want to understand everything really well. And that means when I find a topic that I feel like I need to know, I want to make it my bitch. So I want to spend a lot of time with it until I really nutted it out. And that's when I get more confident in presenting on it, you see. But I'm not actually up here this afternoon, to profess that I am in fact an expert at any of this. Okay, the title of my presentation is A Journey of Discovery. As much as it's a bit of a cliche, especially on talent shows, I'm actually I want to share with you my journey through this and how my perspective has changed and what I've been learning along the way. I hope this is different enough that you get something out of it as well. I will say also that the application of FM within the scheme of this talk, within the subject of this talk, is actually still in the early days. A lot of it's been based off of 567 Collins that Nathan alluded to earlier. And given that that project is still in construction, I can't give you the end as much as Dennis did this morning in terms of where it's ended up. But bear with me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so being an architect from years gone by, this used to be still is one of my favourite buildings, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Anybody been to it? Anybody seen it in the flesh? So there you go. It's a good building. There's obviously a lot of people make the effort. I saw the beauty in form, and particularly when I was learning architecture in university, the form-based architects, those that were able to come up with forms, were glamorised a whole lot more than those that valued function, the old Bauhaus thing. So I won't profess to be any particular skilled designer, and that's probably why I'm no longer in architecture. That's not where I excel. And of course, Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum was the other one I had to see. So I got one trip to Spain and took 2 things off my bucket list in one go. So talking about perspectives and the way you look at different things, I just found a couple of great visual examples for things that tend to get different people seeing different things. It's just a good little photographic example of something that you can stare at for ages and still can't quite figure out what's going on. And this one's a bit more famous. I think you probably would have seen that already. How many people have seen that one already? The old lady and the young lady? And I found this by chance last night, and I quite loved it. I thought, now that sums up BIM for me. Everybody gets to see and play a part in it, but only over a small spectrum. Anybody in the room brave enough to say they do everything in BIM? They've seen everything there is. They're involved in all parts of BIM. No? That's good. I've got an honest audience. I like that. I'm all about honesty in what I present as well. And Dominic, I'm going to have a crack at this. Tharasathar, something like that. Is he still in the room? He's left? Okay, well, it won't matter then. Yeah. He is, yes, that's right, he is a sponsor. He spoke yesterday of the importance and impact of contextualisation in a future context, a future sense, but I think it's still relevant and important now. So If everybody here in this picture could see the context, they'd understand a bit more about what they were doing and what they were seeking to achieve together. Now this is my academic appraisal of the problem. There's two areas in the industry that we're struggling. One is the conversion of information between design and construction, and the other one from construction to FM. So the FM one is the focus of this talk, and that was the extent of my understanding of the problem some time ago. But of course then I tried to dig into it, delve deeper, and the rest of the session is on a little bit of what I've learnt in the process. I have appreciated, or grown to appreciate, the value of process. I'm actually a really big fan of business process maps. How many people use business process maps routinely in the business? A few, but not heaps. How many people have never actually seen a business process map? Okay, so you've all seen them, just not use them. Penn State has a stack of them in the BIM execution plan template that they put out, but I tend to think that they're a bit of like a visual vocabulary. They take a little while to become accustomed to before you start feeling comfortable with interacting with them full time. Would anybody else agree with that? No, just me? Okay. That's all right, I'm confident enough to keep going. And this is one of my favourite slides. I have to include this in every presentation. This is just trying to demonstrate the appreciation of the value of good communication. This is what happens when communication goes wrong. I won't belabor the point, I'll keep moving on. I know we're under time pressure. I have the appreciation now of the need for clarity in language. Anybody who knows me from across the boardroom table will know that I can get my back up pretty quick when I hear certain terms, and I gave a demonstration of that on Wednesday at an afternoon session when somebody said that they do IPD. I've got a few favourite terms here. Value is one. I'd like to strike the word value from the conversation and instead substitute it with what it is you actually mean. When you say, I'm a high-value service delivery officer or something like that, what the hell do you mean? Consulting. You know, I don't like to say I'm a BIM consultant anymore, partly because I think, well, it's a horrible elevator pitch. It doesn't say anything. Quality. And facility management. I mean, I'll get to that in a second. What the hell is facility management? I sat down with the Chief Executive Officer, acting Chief Executive Officer of the FMA some years ago, and she said, Chris, the reality is no facility manager even knows what it is. You know, so there's problem number one. Another favourite of mine, fully coordinated model. Who's ever signed up for a fully coordinated model? Who's committed that sin? And how much did you get burnt? Yeah, I've seen that before. Actual and accurate, they're two words that have been removed from the old LOD definitions. I'm quite happy about that. Sorry. Doing BIM, doing IPD, an LOD something or other model, and federated. I have an understanding of some of those terms, but the thing is, other people can see those words and interpret them differently across the table. So I think to take for granted that they all understand them the same way is a bit of a mistake. So here we go. What is facility management? The International Facility Management Association suggests it's a profession that encompasses multiple disciplines to ensure functionality of the built environment and integrating people, place, process and technology. Does that make it any clearer? Not really to me. That's like saying they're consultants. So I thought I could dig a little bit deeper. All right, these are the 11 core competencies that have been identified by the IFMA. And I tend to think that when we from the BIM community are looking at facility management, the first thing we tend to latch onto is probably those three. Mostly operations and maintenance and technology. All right? When we're talking about, I think it was Jim Barrett mentioned, a number of projects that Turner had done. They provided as-built models. There wasn't a whole lot of take-up they found after a certain time frame from the owners and facility managers. And part of that is because I think some of those facility managers aren't interested in the facilities. They're actually more people-based people. They're interested in the systems that people use in the day-to-day work. It's not so much the building and not so much the built assets. So when we're trying to preach to that group of people about the benefits we can bring to them, we have to try and be selective with our audience. And when it comes back to defining value, we have to learn from them what it is to them. Value is, by definition, all that it's perceived to be. So if you want to have a meaningful conversation about value, you've got to ask the question of who it is you're trying to sell to or to communicate with. What does value mean to you? You know, if I'm a Lamborghini fan and you offer me a Ferrari for free, I might not take it because I like Lamborghinis. Let's see, okay, moving on. So Establishing the value of data is a pretty important step too. We talk a lot about big data, we talk about data information synonymously and so forth. What's the value of it? I think to get to that, you need to ask certain questions. So what data do you need for which purpose? What are you talking about in the first place? What does this mean? What does it allow you to achieve? What can you do with it? And who provides it? And when? And then? And so forth. I'm not going to read all these out, but these are all sort of positive questions to be had in this context. That's one of my favourites. Anybody who's dealt with me in the last few months know that I hate the word accurate. It's one of those ones from the previous slide. So I'll get to answering that in a little while. My favourite question on value is really if something was to be improved by just 1% in your business, what would that mean? Because if we're striving to change something, if you're already at the table and you're trying to help them and you can't agree that something could change by just 1%, then what the hell are you doing at the table? Why have they invited you in if they don't believe something can be improved by 1%? So determining the informational requirements, whether it be for a BIM brief or like in the UK task force, they've got the employers' information requirements and so forth. How do you go about that? Whoops, sorry, it's supposed to be timed. Is that going to work? There we go. What assets do we want to manage? How are they managed now? How does the business work? What information is needed to manage them? You have to sort of scratch below the surface, a bit like with those dangerous vagaries, the terms. You've got to not just take for granted that these things actually exist. Some systems don't exist. Some systems are crap when they do exist. So if you're going to get anywhere, you've got to delve right in. I thought you might like this title. I heard it muttered yesterday, the C word, Kobe. Now, on this particular project, I think Nathan alluded to it earlier, I did, with 5, 6, 7 coming up in a slide or two, start with Kobe as some place to start. But I will say that the way they're communicating with the public leaves a bit to be desired, because I just look at that and I just go, that's really overwhelming. I know what all those things are supposed to be. To me, I regard them as Kobe's children. But to the average person, what? Keep going. Okay, good. I didn't think there was a Freudian slip there. To the average person, a lot of what you read about Kobe doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Look, I regard myself as reasonably tech savvy, and I get lost in it. I know that there's a few people in the room. In fact, who's not a fan of Kobe who has looked at it? Okay, there's a few of you. And for those of you who don't like it, how many of you have actually immersed yourself in it to the best of your ability to then still think that way? A few? Yeah, okay. So I'm still on that journey. I'm not here to slander Kobe as such. And I figured for the project need that I had, I would use it to start with, and if it wasn't exactly what I needed, I would try and make it so. I would augment and bend it a bit. So 5, 6, 7 columns is the primary case study in this particular example. Getting back to this question of accuracy. In fact, as an intro, I should pay a couple of credits. Leighton Contractors, the builders on this project, an investor, of course, you've already heard with the client, the client. And it's been a really, really interesting process for me. I didn't actually expect, Dan, you might laugh at this, I didn't expect some parts of this process to be quite so painless. And so credit to yourself for that. Daniel Cownans, if you want to give everybody a wave, is working for Nexus Point Solutions, which is Leighton's in-house sort of tech BIM expert crew, something along those lines, paraphrasing. Yep. So we had a couple of different challenges on this project. One is that the design was already largely completed before we as AECOM came on board as BIM advisors to Investor. The design data drops, if you were going to be looking at some sort of Kobe output, were pointless because the design was already done. The first FM data handover would be from the contractor, and there was no commercial off-the-shelf CMMS or CAFM in place as yet. So the approach that I took with Nathan was to sit down with him, and it's essentially brute force. We just sat down and we had workshop after workshop after workshop, hashing our way through different asset types and trying to work out, okay, what is the data that you need for your purposes? What is FM to you? What is your day-to-day responsibilities? What do you need and how does it impact on you if you have it and if you don't have it, etc., etc. So my first attempt at defining what was required was this. It's an as-built model requirements spreadsheet. And hopefully I can get this working on a twin screen. Can you see? Let me see. There we go. There we go. This is the real thing, because the slide doesn't quite do it justice. And I'm going to have to look up at the screen for a sec to do this. I'm not expecting you guys to be able to read that, although one of the reasons I made it live is that I can zoom in and show you a bit. So I figured that accuracy needs to be defined as a number of different things. And I'll come back to what those are in a second. But the response that I had from Daniel and him thinking on behalf of the others around him, the subcontractors, that it was probably a little bit overwhelming. And if I'm honest, I could certainly understand that point of view. Let me see if I can kill this again. Oh, now I've lost the top of it. That's all right. I will kill it there. Okay, just go to the next slide for a second. No. There we go. All right, so in defining model accuracy, I thought it wouldn't be a good idea to be able to describe each of the assets in the building to say, how accurate does it need to be? Because I didn't believe that they all needed to be accurate as each other. You don't need, for example, a flex pipe in a plenum space to be within 1 mil. That's ridiculous. And what are you going to do with that? So I thought, well, let's come up with a variety, and then we can assign different terminology with these definitions to match to each asset type, which is what I've done in the previous slide. So down the side here, I've got primitive. Where's my mouse? There we go. I've got primitives as per Vico's MPS3 stuff. I won't get into that just now. But basically, every asset in the building can be likened to one or another form. So it's just a question of trying to simplify that list. And then I said, okay, well, so a profiled wall might need to be, in terms of its width or its height, needs to be within, say, 10 mil, 20 mil, whatever. And yet with its inclination, it might be okay within 30 mil. So it's quite a complicated matrix. So taking Dan's feedback on board, I thought, let's just define the problem further and see what we can come up with. So there we go. Model accuracy needs to address each of those things. When the LOD definitions say it needs to be accurate in terms of this, that, or the other, until recently, this is actually what it was kind of referring to. What the hell is accuracy in the first place but those things? There's 8 different dimensions that it's talking about, 8 different things to be talking about, 8 metrics. So it's no wonder that LODs have been problematic, because they're something else trying to indicate a wide variety of metrics in a single term or a single reference, when really I think it's just trying to oversimplify things. So take 2 on this for the model requirements was to sum up everything into a single number for accuracy and say, more or less, that each of those other 8 metrics were to receive this single value applied to it. And based on a little bit of toing and froing across the table, we ended up on something like 50 mil, wasn't it, Dan, for most things. There's some that were 100, some that got out to about 200 or 250, I think, at the upper limit. We said, okay, everything's going to be within that. So when we say, to investor, we're going to provide you with the as-built model, or when they say we want an as-built model, we can define what that means, geometrically speaking. It's great if you get everything laser scanned and everything's done, lining up by eye, but that's still going to be out by several mil because of variation and material tolerances and so forth. So we're just trying to contractually define what does this really mean. So in agreement with Leighton's, we settled on these figures, and we got there in the end, didn't we, Dan? Yeah. It does raise, in terms of what does an as-built model mean, though, that does raise some other questions. Who's going to use this in the first place? Coming back again to this question of uptake, implementation within client or owner or facility manager organisations. Who's going to use it? And how will they use it? If you're not asking these questions and provoking them to think about this, in fact, not just provoking, but pushing them to think about this, I think we've got to be forceful, and that's in some ways part of leadership. Who's going to maintain or manage it? Are they going to outsource it? Are they going to give it back to you to service? Are they going to send it off to some overseas company because they want it done cheaply? Do they want to make changes to a native model or to an open source model? Is that possible? What can you do? Do you want to make changes through the FM software or to the model? If the facility manager needs to make a change, where do they know to go? Do they go into the model to make a change to a parameter, or do they go through the back-end database? And if they change it in one place, does it happen? Does it replicate through? These all need to be asked. Who's going to own it? Having access will vary from ownership, and one point I would like to make is that model ownership is not necessarily the same thing as IP ownership. Okay, so often you hear bandied about by those, and I've been around it long enough, You get people from owner organisations thinking, well, I paid for the model's mine, right? Okay, yes, you might be able to take possession of the model if it's by agreement, but you might also find that you don't own the IP and that you can't, for example, extract all the models or components and then try and sell them on. Not that you're so inclined really, but I'm just saying technically, legally, I'm not sure that you can. So the as-built data requirements, this is where we get back to COBie a little bit. If I click on here, I should be able to open this up. That's up there, good. No, hang on. All right, so this gets a little bit complex. I'm not exactly a programming guru anymore. In my yesteryears, I sort of did a little bit here and there. So I started with Excel, just to try and keep things simple. Again, I'm not expecting you guys to be able to read all this clearly. If I can find my mouse. What I've done is basically list each of the asset types, serviced assets, based on the COBie guide and what was in it. And then, for example, if I start with just chillers, it hyperlinks me to another tab, and I can see a whole bunch of parameters that have been listed out here with other information, like, for example, whatever units or typical values, which COBie worksheet that responds to if you were going to be going down a formal COBie route, and remarks about it, maybe qualifying remarks. My thinking in this is that if I could make this clear to the people that I was asking to provide the information, that's going to help the process. I think when you say things like, oh, we just want COBie, or if I was to present this in this actual format to the subcontractors, I'd expect them to resist because this looks terribly overwhelming. The reality is we've got type parameters and we've got instance parameters in there. So for, you might have 300 instances of something like a sprinkler and you're putting in some parameters. You might not need to put in 300 instances of one value for those 300 sprinklers. You might put it in once and it populates through the rest. So there's got to be smart ways to go about getting this information. I think one of the fears about COBie is this: every time you see COBie as a spreadsheet, it's always about fat finger entry. Dennis, where are you, mate? Your favourite term? Fat finger entry. I'll do the motion with it as well. There you go. So in this process, Nathan and I figured out, all right, appropriately, there's a few things to be understood about this data. In fact, if I go to the next slide here, which is just for me, I know I'm going to stay on that spreadsheet. Come on, there we go. Okay, so these are colour-coded, and these colours indicate a certain purpose behind the data or a certain condition. So all the dark greenish ones, they're all sort of standard COBie parameters that we know can be extracted straight from Revit. We've got some blue ones there that Nathan and I agreed, you know what, they might actually be straight from COBie, but we're suggesting, based on how things are procured, things like replacement cost and expected life, they can be somewhat rubbery and subjective. So the blue stuff is the parameters that we want provided as fields, but we don't need values. So we're not actually asking the contractor or the subbies to fill those out. We can populate those later. The purple ones, of course, they can come straight from the software, like the GUIDs and so forth. And then we get to the little brown ones. Where's my mouse again? There we go. Brown ones are a little bit optional. I'm still a little bit unclear on the difference between how do you really get to the bottom definition of tag number from asset identifier and barcode, etc. So we're basically saying, look, at least one of those three has to be filled out. It might vary per asset type as to which one's most appropriate. And then we've got some other additional ones which are client required, which are specific to that particular asset. So the maintenance responsibility, this is something Nathan's quite big on. He wants some transparency. Is this asset something that actually belongs to the tenant that I'm not supposed to necessarily be maintaining? Or is it something that belongs to me and therefore when it fails it is totally up to me? And when they move out, how do I know how to get back to base building conditions before I get the next tenant in? So there's this focus on churn here that I hadn't really had to think about up till then. The red ones, I left those in there just because I think it's a good part of learning. The red ones are certain values that were suggested by others in my organisation. I went to them sort of for peer review on this as well. So, for facility management, what's the values to do with this asset type that might be interesting, might be useful? They put some things forward, and in the negotiation across the table, in getting this through, we agreed basically they're not required. So the red ones, they're left in, but they're actually abortive. So at some point, we'll probably go back through then for another version of this for future projects, and it might include this and some more. So at the top of this, I was trying to get a little bit smart. I got a hyperlink back to the menu, so I could go to, for example, fire extinguishers, and you might have the same sort of values and then a lesser number of custom ones. There's a couple of other things I should say about the data. Where are we? There's a few other things. I'll go back to the slideshow. I'll come back to lessons learned in a sec. One was that, oh no, it's in these lessons learned, that's fine. So, got just 3 more slides. Just losing my mouse, here we go. Lessons learned, we've got to be clear with outcomes. I know it's not possible to predict everything in absolute detail if you've never done it before, that's a challenge. But if at least you can be clear about what you'd like to achieve and you gear everything up to that, then you're on a good path to start with, and you can adjust if you're clever on the way through. Congruent agreements, I think the gents before me, Nathan and Michael, mentioned it about setting up contracts to be aligned with what outcomes that is you're pursuing. So, for example, in maintenance contracts with maintaining subcontractors, don't set things up so that they get paid per hour if you're trying to get them to be more efficient. To me, that's a bit of a conflict. You know, maybe set them other KPIs about, you know, response times only. You know, if they're sitting on their backside because there's nothing to fix, maybe that's okay. But if there's stuff to be fixed, you want it done promptly, you know, so make sure the contracts are geared for that. Clear definitions, I've already covered that one off enough. Installers versus maintainers. I would relate a story, I can't remember his name, Dan, but there was a particular meeting that we had around the table, and one of your colleagues was a little bit confused, maybe a little sceptical as to why there was a particular requirement for one bit of data, and Nathan eloquently described exactly why he needed it, and this guy just sort of sat back in his chair and folded his arms and said, oh, I suppose I can see why you want that, you know, and it was great. I mean, the dynamics across the table in those discussions I actually quite enjoyed, because they weren't all everybody wanting to help each other necessarily, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a case of just learning, sort of back and forth dialogue. What is it? Why is it that you need this? That makes no sense to me, followed by an explanation of why it makes sense, and then an acceptance of the fact, okay, well, I'm not used to that, and that's different for me, but I can see why you'd need it. You know, so there's progress, just incremental progress as we go. It's great. Getting to the table, I found on other projects, just getting any facility manager to a table is really, really tough. Some projects, they haven't even been appointed, and you're trying to design the project with the end in mind. It's really tough to do that if you don't know who you're dealing with, or what systems you're going to be dealing with, or how that particular facility that you're seeking to design is going to be used. The effort, duration and commitment, I think that I wouldn't have ever believed how many hours this has taken to get through these discussions with Nathan. Well, they were quite intensive, weren't they? They were gruelling. They'd be long sort of morning or afternoon sessions, just trying to get to the bottom of why we need this information and how it's going to be used for the project. Improvement versus perfection. You know, if we'd really wanted to, we could have tried to play super hardball with Leighton's and say, no, we want just anything we can dream up. But where would that get us? You know, we realised this, we have a bigger objective. They were actually quite good. The attitudes of Leighton, I think, were fantastic. You know, I know that they're probably wearing some of this exercise at a loss, but they're seeing the opportunity within it. You know, and I think that's a great collaborative mindset to have. We're all sort of thinking, okay, we're all in this together learning, let's go in eyes wide open, and we can all walk away basically benefiting from this experience and taking something of that with us to the next project that we're on. Being selective in the scope, again, picking things like, you know, there's COBie attributes that cover, I mean, warranty duration and warranty, you know, the contacts for that sort of thing. For things like light switches, who's ever going to call up somebody to replace a $5 plate on a wall? That's ridiculous. So strike them out, be done with it, and move on to something else. And it might be that we actually bit off quite a bit, you know, with the number of serviced asset types we looked at. We could have maybe pared that back, but we wanted to have something meaningful at the end. I mean, Mark Tate from Investor was quite vehement from the start about he wanted this to be an exemplar, so we had to be pushing hard. We had to be ambitious. Don't underestimate the impact of client organisational issues. Nathan politely hinted before about some of his organisational issues with IT and so forth, and I'm not actually referring to that, but commonly I think you'll find that the funds for capital expenditure versus operational expenditure can come through different people from different departments. And if they're not actually, you know, glued together properly, if they don't have a great working relationship, if they don't understand that ultimately it's all coming from one bucket somewhere down the line, then you might actually have those opposed. So you're trying to preach about OPEX savings to a CAPEX person. It's kind of fruitless. You need to get that OPEX person at the table. You need to show them what things can be done. And then say, guys, let's look at this as an opportunity for you to adjust some of the ways you do things internally. Sometimes you're just asking for trouble doing that because you're then in for a 4-year implementation program before you get anything achieved. But you've got to start somewhere. I think that's where we've got to be pushing clients and owners. And to establish metrics, coming up with things that... ROI is almost one of those terms that I don't like anymore, because people have different interpretations of what that means. And a lot of the metrics that you seek to apply were built 25, 30 years ago. They don't apply anymore. With the technology that you're using, the processes and so forth, they're completely redundant, but nobody stops to ask the question. Does this actually work for us anymore? Does this metric, does this KPI actually have any meaning, any value to offer? If you'll pardon the word. Let's keep going. Model and data specifications and COBie. Yeah, so for the next stage of what I'm looking to do with some other clients on this, taking the sort of schema and building on it and trying to improve it, is to be looking at XML. I'm not an XML guru by any means, but I did watch 75 videos straight on YouTube in about a day and a half. So I feel a little bit better off. My brain hurt afterwards though. Verification, verifying the data. Daniel De Silva, you in the room, buddy? No? Okay. Oh, there he is, up the back waving. Okay, Daniel De Silva from Zootech. Sorry, remiss of me to mention earlier, Leighton have appointed Zootech for the collection of all their construction information and commissioning and so forth. And so we've got, there's an RFP exercise to be looking at what Investor are going to be using going forward. And it might be Zootech, in which case it'd be a really easy transition. It might be something else. So we've got an exercise of having to make sure that we can get anything that's collected into Zootech out of that and into something else. And as part of that, it's going to be this sort of QA exercise, making sure that there's no information loss and information integrity. So verification of also what's been collected is a huge part of this that we need to be looking at. And we're going to be collecting that information on Zootech view through nice, elegant, minimalist forms to make it nice and easy for the subbies. We really are trying to make the user experience for that as simple and as clean as we can. And that's going to be starting in earnest in a number of weeks, isn't it, Dan? Yeah. So maybe next year I can come back and show you guys some more. I'll get Daniel or both Dans to present. Efficiency. We need to be thinking about the efficiency of the data collection. Okay, it comes back to this whole issue of my next term, I think, which is, infowhelm. Anybody heard of infowhelm before? Can anybody guess what it means just by the word? To me, it is something that's a bit more self-explanatory. If you show somebody a massive spreadsheet and ask them to fill it out, they're going to see it as a lot of work. If you show them a form that only asks them for 3 things and that populates their appropriate bits in that massive spreadsheet, then they're going to be more willing to engage. That's only logical. COBie is useful, I think, even if used informally. I don't profess to be the expert. I'm sure there's other people that know more about COBie than I do. This is just my experience with it, and I'm still keen to figure out more. Not all assets are the same, mentioning things like GPOs and wall plates and so on. There are limitations to its application. I know that it hasn't been appropriated for Australia. Exactly what would be required, I'm not certain yet. And they could do with a better PR or comms department. If the average person can't get the message, then there's something wrong with the message. That's what I figure. And the last slide, just a couple of interpersonal tips. Negotiation skills are really important. Obviously, I don't profess either to be an expert at negotiation, but coming to the table with the right attitude is a good start. I think there's a tremendous value in storytelling. And I come back to the point before about Nathan explaining articulately, sort of using little stories about how he would go about his business. Little parables almost, why this information is required. Empathy goes a long way, just trying to see things from other people's perspectives. I can stand up here today and say, I'm an architect, I don't understand a whole lot about services or facility management for that matter, but by being prepared to admit it as an opening conversation across a table, I think it goes a long way. And I firmly believe that by admitting your limitations, you can actually build credibility. It doesn't diminish your credibility. And that's what people appreciate at conferences like this, is this warts and all things, being able to hear real stories from people as opposed to just, BIM wash and sales stuff. Patience and give and take, just understanding where other people are coming from and taking it easy. Don't get too upset too quickly. And beware technophiles. I've seen and heard from a number of different people, there's a bit of frustration in the BIM community, particularly within the design consultants area, about the lack of uptake within FM, etc. And I think part of that is that we're so enthusiastic about what it is we're doing, we come on pretty strong. If you're, I don't know if you found the same, Nathan. You're a bit of an exception though, because you'd already done some studies into BIM and FM. But if you had facility there's more than one, isn't there? How many people are facility managers in the room? Okay, they're frightened. They're too frightened to say, or they're too frightened to come anyway. But we just need to ease up a bit, I think, on getting them to transition. If we get alongside them, okay, and lead them that way, rather than pushing them from behind and saying, you need to do this, you need to go here, this is fantastic, oh, fantastic. It's like a dogmatic evangelist. It's not going to work very, effectively. Take a gradual approach. Just slow it down, soften it up a bit. Show them one or two things that they might really, really like after you've asked the question about what value is to them. Okay, well, what if I could help you with that? Just one or two things at a time. Come on, one more. Oh, there we go. Listen and clarify. Good part of communication skills is just to listen. And even for myself, sometimes I talk too much, I don't listen enough. But when I know I'm going into a negotiation sort of frame, I need to just chill and just start listening to others if you're trying to get somewhere with them. And clarify what you've heard. If you're not certain, Warwick Stennis, where you're just down here, one thing I've learnt from you, mate, and you've been quite open and honest about this in the past, you're not afraid to ask the dumb questions. And I'd like to say I'm the same. And sometimes I know you do that for the sake of others in the room, even though you know the question, you know the answer. And I think there's a tremendous value in that. So anybody who's in a room where you know that's going on, they should have your respect because they're trying to do it for the sake of others. That's actually an attribute of leadership for me. And finally, I think it was Andy mentioning at the end of his talk about 360 feedback, just going back, asking for reviews, making sure you're clarifying, hearing things, assessing performance of yourself and others, etc. I think that's a great way to approach this, especially if you're trying to enter somebody else's world. So I would leave you with these words, engage and try and listen more than you speak. Thank you very much.